Welcome back on AAU Talks. My name is Ajiman Ochedako, and our guest for today is an award-winning founding director of the Training Center in Communications and also the first-based African institution to run a training program for researchers and scientists in effective skills on communication skills. And it's so exciting, and it's quite an achievement. So I have with me in the house, Joy Owango.
Thank you so
Joy,
much.
you're welcome to AU Talks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. We had lots of spectacles seeing how you've transcended from TCC and also promoting the agenda of open access and open science amidst all the storms.
Yes.
Tell us how it's been like, your mission and vision and objectives at TCC, and how you're particularly focusing on open science and open access.
Okay, so we started 18 years ago. And we are based in Nairobi, Kenya, and we are housed by our parent partner, the University of Nairobi. And the idea of TCC Africa came about when we had a small project on biosafety and biotechnology, and we noticed that the researchers within that project could not communicate to each other. These are researchers who are working on the same project. Some are biosafety scientists, specialists, others are biotechnology specialists, and they could not communicate to each other in terms of even the academic writing. So we felt that it was essential that we train these researchers on how to write academic papers such that they could understand what they were saying. And we realized it was a bigger problem because even by then, this is 18 years ago, scientists were already struggling on how to communicate with non-scientists. It's now much better, but they were already struggling with non-scientists. And interestingly enough, during that period, funders were demanding for a transdisciplinary approach to research. So meaning a social scientist should be able to understand what a biological scientist is working on, and vice versa, or a health scientist should be able to understand what an economic researcher is working on, and vice versa. So that means that you have to write your papers, your academic papers, in a manner that scientists who are not in your field can understand, because you need to work together before you start talking to the greater community. So that's how we started. And we realized that there were bigger problems than that. As we were doing the trainings, we were conducting the trainings, we realized that universities were struggling to have access to resources. Unless you're in a funded project, a researcher would have access to all the resources because the funder is paying for it. The collaborator, most likely from the global north, would be sharing the resources for them because they have access to it. They can afford to buy those resources. But in Africa, you're still struggling to get them. But then if you're not in a project, you're struggling. Resources that you can do your literature search on, which a researcher in a funded project would have access to without any issues. So that is now where the idea of, before open access became a buzzword, we're looking at how can we help the recipients of our trainings have free access to some of these resources. So that's how we started working with the libraries to see what resources do you have that are free, who are the partners you're working with, so that we can be training our recipients on the same. And then as time went by, we realized it's just not an institutional challenge, but it's also a policy issue. All right? What are our governments doing to make sure that our universities have continuous access, or institutions to by then, as I said, we didn't use the word open access, free access to some of these resources to help researchers who are not necessarily funded. And as fortune would have it, that's now during the period now when the open science movement was growing, and then the various activities that fall under it, like open access, came to play. So for us, it has been not a smooth sailing, but it has been, we have been growing with the current, and that is how we got actively in open science and open science related activities. And yeah, a testament to our activities is that we've trained over 30,000 masters and PhD researchers on the continent.
Great.
These are researchers who are ideally not supported in funded projects. So that says a lot about the need for such. And we constantly have such trainings, and we have more institutions and researchers coming into the training. Yes.
You mentioned that the University of Nairobi is
our parent partner.
Great partner for you. How do you collaborate together with UON, and how you render these capacity building programs?
Okay, so interestingly enough, when we presented this idea to UON, the then vice chancellor, the late Professor Magoha.
Yeah, Magoha.
Yes. He jumped on the idea because even though he was the vice chancellor and then he ended up becoming the Minister of Education in Kenya, he jumped onto the idea because he already saw what the challenge was. He could easily see the fact that there was more research output coming out of funded projects, but not the greater academic community. And he wanted to see how we could help the University of Nairobi researchers. And we've worked with 5 vice chancellors after that within the University of Nairobi with the same goal, because it's about complementary support of the university, whereby we are continuously working with supporting their postgraduate students. And we are seeing a big change. And they encouraged us as a university to work with various universities in Africa. So like we have partners with universities in some of the universities in West Africa, and also in Eastern and Southern Africa, but we offer these trainings throughout. And we are seeing universities improving their research output, which is such a great joy. We are seeing universities going up in their rankings, with them sending us feedback. Is like, if you did not take us through this training on scientific writing and strategic journal publishing, okay, which we'll be talking about later, because there'll be elements of open access on that, we wouldn't be seen anywhere. If you did not guide us on how we can adopt open science practices, we wouldn't be much more visible. So we are seeing vice chancellors, leadership in universities coming back to us, seeing a significant growth in their performance in their research.
You know, just doing a quick take back on adopting open science, open access practices.
Right.
Well, what has been the challenge thus far? I know you're trying to just put everybody together to understand the need for open access and open science practices. What has been the challenge?
Okay, let's acknowledge who started these conversations actively, the stakeholders who started these conversations actively. It's librarians and knowledge managers. They're the ones who were on the ground, who saw we can't access resources. And resources are expensive for academic communities. So they are the ones who started this conversation. And now it has built up to include various stakeholders. Now, what are the challenges? Let's start from an institutional perspective. From an institutional perspective is also you have leadership within the universities that have been using the traditional ways, have been adopting and using the traditional ways of publishing and using those traditional methods as ways to assess research performance, which contribute to tenure or promotion.
Which you see as very rigid.
It is rigid. It is rigid because it worked. That's why it's called tradition. It's traditional. It worked. But as of 30 years ago, there's been a movement in open science to make work much more accessible. And it means that you have to have better research assessment methods in order to help people get promotions. You know, when you're talking about promotions, it means more money. It means livelihoods. So let's call it what it is. It is the decision will be made on whether you're going to get more money or not, on whether you publish in the journal that your institution asks you to publish in. Okay. So let's call it what it is. So if it is going to impede on your promotion, people will say no. All right. So that fear. So there's a need for institutional change and understanding the impact open science will have, number one, on the visibility of the institution, on increasing internationalization, which is important for universities, on increasing collaboration and increasing funding and its performance nationally, regionally, and globally. And which is always the low-hanging fruit, how it will attract top talent. If you're looking at top researchers, top students, they will look at, is this university visible? Where are they doing their research? Who cited their work? Open science is one of the key things that can help that. So assuaging vice chancellors to make them see that this is what open science can do for you. All right. And then also the other fear from an institutional perspective is cost. And this is the cost of publishing. Okay. So this is what is known popularly as article processing costs. Now, when it comes to article processing costs, or popularly known as APCs, the fear at an institutional level is that it's too expensive. And let's be honest, with any new movement, there's always an unintended consequence. And one of the unintended consequences of open science is high article processing costs.
Oh,
but
why is it so?
It's unintended because you see, remember, publishing is a business. So let's look at what it is. So some of the publishing houses that we are working with are over 150 years old. So it is a business. So of course, any business development manager will jump on the opportunity on article processing costs. So hence, it's an unintended consequence. But what has come out of that? The good thing is that if you're in a low-income country or a low-middle-income country, the mitigation for high article processing costs is the World Bank Equitable Publishing Program. So meaning most of the publishers have to put their journals there so that recipients of that can either have waived costs or really reduced costs from the original article processing cost.
Okay.
So you see, for every unintended consequence, there's been issues to manage it. So, and then of course the issues of peer review and the likes. But of course there's the rise of open peer review communities to help make sure that your work is accessible. And when it comes to publishing, you know, one of the things that also came out, this is still at institutional, we are here to talk about policy. Policy is more at national and regional level.
Yeah.
When it comes to publishing, one of the unintended consequence that came out of open access was predatory publishing. So vice chancellors or leadership will say no. But then out of that, the mitigation is that we have the rise of preprints, whereby you submit your manuscript into a preprint repository, it goes through open peer review, the world sees it, it is given a digital object identifier, so it is protected. Nobody's going to steal that work, so it deals with issues of research integrity.
Yeah.
And publishers will go for the preprint faster than you leaving your manuscript in your computer because the world is seeing it, it is already going through peer review.
Yeah.
And we are seeing institutions already acknowledging preprints as one of the outputs that they produce. Now, these are some of just the issues, but as I said, for every issue, there's always a mitigating aspect out of it. They're always coming up with solutions for it. And then at a national level, so what have been the challenges? So at policy level, you remember I said the conversation started with librarians. Then unfortunately, because it started with librarians, then you started having different factions speaking about open science. So for the longest time in Africa, at least in Africa, open science was being done at a fragmented level. So what we're trying to do is bring all the stakeholders together. All right. And some of the success stories is that this is not
before even what you go into how successful you've been so far. I think that all the researchers out there who are seeing this are beginning to have someone advocate for them and tell their stories out there loud. But before you go there, we'll go for a quick break. We'll come back. We'll let you talk about the success stories, and then we'll talk more about some of this other attaching challenges.
Explore a whole new world of exciting visuals with AAU TV. Get ready for a mix of interesting talk shows, interviews, discovery documentaries, and news on AAU TV. It's not just about watching TV, it's about experiencing something special. AAU TV reaches over 25 countries in Africa, bringing you a blend of knowledge and fun. Learn about different cultures as you enjoy the shows. If you have events or want to showcase your business, we've got you covered. Watch AAU TV free-to-air channel on satellite. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter, at AAU TV. Reach out on call or WhatsApp us at +233 26 629 6601 or +233 20 399 5210. AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa.
You're welcome back on AAU Talks, the voice of higher education in Africa, and we're still on the issue on the open access and open science agenda for Africa, with the award-winning director for the Training Center in Communications, Joy Owango. Joy, before we went on break, you were trying to help us understand the challenges from the policy side.
Yes.
What are these challenges?
As I said earlier, the conversation started with the librarians.
Yeah.
And they really pushed this. Now we have various factions talking about open science. So if you want to nationalize a conversation on open science, you cannot have fragmented conversations.
Yeah.
All right?
It has to be unitary.
Yeah, you all have to speak the same voice. And also open science has to, when you're looking at open science, it needs to go beyond the higher education sector. Open science has to be multi-sectoral. That's why it is science for all.
Yeah.
Science for all is not higher education all. It is society.
Yeah.
All right. So when you're having conversations on open science, you have to make it multi-sectoral. And one of the success stories in Africa is the creation of the African Open Science Platform, whose mandate is to collate all the activities that are happening in Africa on open science, whether it's infrastructural, advocacy, or infrastructural. At least people know what is going on. And they have nodes in Eastern and Western Africa, Eastern, Southern, and Northern Africa. And of course, they're in the process of setting up, of putting the one for West Africa.
West Africa, okay.
Of course. Now, but with the Open Science, African Open Science Platform, you end up having now a contribution. Everybody can contribute to what is happening.
Okay.
To that, to the African Open Science Platform, and in turn, they can give information globally on what is happening in Africa. So that's a good thing. That is a success story. But then going down nationally, there is a need to have this nationalized, and what we have done with our partners, in this case, the Public Library of Science Plus, is that we strategically partnered with the supranationals in Africa at policy level. So we started with the East African Community Parliament, and out of it was the East African Science and Technology Commission, which is the regional body for all science and in East Africa for all science, technology, and innovation institutions, councils rather. And the thing is, such bodies, they normally have regional policies on certain thematic areas. Science, technology, and innovation is one of them.
Okay.
And that is where we felt the open science principles need to be included within those conversations. Now, when you got such a regional body, you have no choice but to work with everybody. Because there is no way a regional body is going to work in silos. So when we started working with the East African Science and Technology Commission, the first thing they said is that we need to identify all the stakeholders in open science at a regional level and at a national level. So we did that, and that is how we were able to have advocacy in Eastern Africa by bringing all the stakeholders. So basically, if you're having any advocacy activity, in this case, we were calling them the open science dialogues, which are still ongoing.
Okay.
We needed to have library consortia there. We needed to have the data commission there, because the data commission not only represents the higher education, but it represents literally, it is multi-sectoral.
Yeah.
We needed to have a research council there. We needed to have funders there. And this is national and international funders. We needed to have vice chancellors associations there. And we needed to have the commissions of universities there. Those are the people we needed to have before we start any dialogue. And because of that, we were having unified conversations.
Okay.
And the success story out of Eastern Africa is that the East African Science and Technology Commission, now through the East African Community, is the first region in Africa, this is the first in Africa, to have open science principles within the STI policy.
Okay.
That means 7 presidents signed, 7 ministers of science, technology, and innovation, or maybe higher education, depending on the country, signed. All those 7 would not have signed and ratified it if we were not working in cohesion. The same is being replicated in ECOWAS. So we are doing the same with ECOWAS. We are working at the same level with ECOWAS for the EcoPost.
How is the ECOWAS doing?
Oh, we have started. We have started. So we did a regional open science dialogue last year. We're going to do a second one this year, and then we follow the same process as we have done in Eastern Africa, and they have been very receptive. And most importantly is that they are looking at the lessons learned from East Africa to include, especially on the inclusion of open science principles, to include within the EcoPost as well.
Okay.
So as I said, this cannot be done if you don't work with supranationals, and supranationals will not work with you if you don't aggregate the national stakeholders together for you to have these conversations. And now with the vice chancellors, because I look at AAU as a supranational, supporting all the universities in Africa, but focusing on building the capacities of the vice chancellor. So working with the Association of African Universities, we were able to bring leadership in universities and build their capacities on understanding the importance of adopting open science principles within their institutes, such that now when they have their Senate meetings, and in the Senate, you'll have all the leaders within the university, they are of one voice. Remember, when you're looking at training leadership in higher education, you're looking at training the librarians, directors of research, the vice chancellors, deputy vice chancellors. So we were building their capacities on understanding the importance of adopting open science principles. So we did this in Eastern Africa, we did this in Northern Africa, we did this in Southern Africa. What is actually left is Western Africa, which will be done later this year.
All this with the AAU?
With the AAU.
Okay.
And all this was with the Association of African Universities. And all this, they all come down to one thing. If you want to have policy made, you need to have cohesive conversations. You need to have cohesive conversations. They cannot be fragmented, so that it can be done either at national level or supranational level.
Yeah.
Yes.
And these strategies that you have put in place, actually,
These what?
The strategies you are bringing in place.
Yes.
All these plans
Yes.
are helping you bring together all these stakeholders to build a unified voice so
Yes.
we can achieve open access.
Open science.
Open science.
Yes.
And through open science, we look forward to achieve open access.
Absolutely. Yes.
There is a conversation, on the other hand, about the researcher, the researcher's plight, and also the vice chancellor's expectation against open science and open access.
Yeah.
Someone's promotion, well-being is at stake.
Yes.
How is this conversation being dealt with?
Okay. So now, with the rise of open access, the activity which is under the movement of open science, issues of research assessment have come up. Because what researchers, now let's look at it from the lens of the researcher's plight. Researchers are saying that, are raising concerns that vice chancellors have already preset places on where they must publish in order to get promotions. And they want improved research assessment procedures, which include open access. Okay? Because open access contributes not only to the visibility of the university, which will be a benefit to the vice chancellor, but also the performance of the university and the visibility of the researcher.
How is that possible?
Because it's accessible. So there are different types of open access. Okay, there's golden open access, there's green open access, there's hybrid open access, and there's bronze open access. So let's start with gold open access.
Yeah.
So gold open access is where you pay article processing costs. Where I said the unintended consequences came up, but then now it is being mitigated with the World Bank Equitable Publishing Program. So researchers pay a certain amount to publish.
Yeah.
And if you're in a country which is a recipient of the World Bank Equitable Publishing Program, it means that either it is waived or it is very low. But these are journals. These are high impact journals. And when I'm talking about high impact journals, these are journals that are indexed in databases, bibliographic and citation databases, and indexing and abstracting services. Okay? So not Scopus. Scopus is one of the many. So let's be clear.
You're right.
Scopus is one of the many, and Scopus, you have to buy it. Okay, and now with the rise of open science, we have seen the rise of a number of open access and abstracting indexing services that use international journal publishing set standards.
What are you calling good standing?
These are gold. No, it's not gold standard. The gold standard, you end up blocking it. It's journal publishing standards, which were set by the publishers, which includes what Scopus uses.
Okay.
So whatever standards you'll see in Scopus, there are some who even have much more rigorous processes.
Oh.
All right. So when I talk about high impact journals, let's not confuse it. I'm telling you that it is impact factor. No, it is a journal that has met those international journal and publishing standards, and they in turn have been indexed.
Okay.
All right. And these journals, if they are indexed in a citation database, of course they're going to start racking up impact factor. Then we have the hybrid open access, which is slowly fading away, whereby you still subscribe to the journal. So you pay to the journal, the institute subscribes to the journal, but then unfortunately you still have to pay to publish in that journal. But it is, as I said, it's an old method that is slowly fading away. So people need to know that. Then there's the rise of green open access.
Okay.
And this green open access is mostly it's about putting your work in repositories, and also using preprints as well. And it means that, especially when you're using preprints, it means that your paper is in the process of being published. All right. So when you look at all these options, and bronze is where you've put your paper in a journal, and then it is embargoed for a certain period of time before it is released. Okay. So when you look at these various open access models, a researcher has options on what to use. But if the researcher is restricted on publishing in certain journals, it inhibits him on his promotion. So the plight of the researcher is that he knows that there are options that are available to make his work accessible. These are in high impact journals that are not necessarily, as I said, Scopus is not the only one.
Yeah.
There are so many that have come up. There's the Directive of Open Access Journals, which all our institutions in Africa have access to. There's the African Journals Online. Okay, we have Dimensions, which is an open access citation database.
Okay.
We have Core, which is open access. We have Science Open, and the list is endless. And they all have to meet the same standards. So, and the irony is the journals that you find in Scopus are already also in these other databases. All right. So the issue is the researcher now has options. Now, the expectation of the Vice Chancellor is that the fact that they've been using traditional methods for research assessment, it is inhibiting on the growth of researchers who are adopting open access practices. And the fact that there are already mitigations to most of the challenges about open access, it means that it won't affect the institute. So it is an issue of, from a managerial perspective, it's an issue of adapting quotient change. Okay, we've already gone through the social change, the SQ, all right? And there's a bit of EQ involved, emotional intelligence involved, because it's talking to people and making them understand the difference. But now we are at the CQ level, whereby with all this information that has been presented to you, there's a movement, there are unintended consequences, but there are mitigating factors to those unintended consequences. What is still stopping you? It is the change quotient. That will take time, but going back to the universal conversations we are having with vice chancellors and their leadership, we are seeing change.
Okay.
Because now, when a librarian goes to the Senate and says we need to adopt open science and also include it in the research assessment, they are not fighting the vice chancellors. People are looking at it differently. So Senate meetings are becoming a bit more palatable in this adoption. So we are seeing a change where vice chancellors are looking at adopting these practices to support their researchers. But most importantly, when you look at it from the vice chancellor's lens, they look at how visible will this university be?
Which is just...
That is their low-hanging fruit.
Maybe they should give it some time and then see.
Yes.
Because the features actually allow visibility.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is what they're saying. How visible will this institution be? Will we attract more funding? If we are And open science is able to answer all that. And that's why it's becoming easier for them.
I'm just hoping they bear that risk.
Yeah.
So we are just at the brink of the moment where we have to wrap up the discussion. It's been an amazing one, very enlightening for every researcher out there and also university leader to appreciate the evolution of the publications and the points of open science and open access. Thanks to you, Joy, for being very unwavering about this agenda, pushing it right from the beginning. A decade-long promotion and advocacy, and you'll still look forward to do more.
Yes.
I hear you doing more on the PIDs,
yes.
the DOIs, amazing
yes.
works to help protect digital knowledge, and so that we have just little moment, just 1 minute.
Okay.
On the PID. One
okay.
minute.
On the persistent identifiers. Yeah. So when we're talking about open science, one of the activities is open infrastructure, and when you look at the continent, Africa is about 18% of the world's population. About less than 1% of African research contributes to the global economy, knowledge economy. And there are several factors: is poor infrastructure, lack of visibility, and the likes. And one of the things that we challenged was that in the rise of open infrastructure, what helps make our research accessible is the use of persistent identifiers. And persistent identifiers we come from the school of thought that the persistent identifier should be able to solve persistence and accessibility, depending on the kind of work you want accessible. If you want your work accessible, choose a persistent identifier that will help you solve persistence and accessibility. And because of that, we launched the program called the Africa PID Alliance, where we want to start producing African originated persistent identifiers that solve persistence and accessibility, focusing on areas that have been largely ignored, that is indigenous knowledge, cultural heritage, and patent data. When it comes to patent data, less than 8% of our patents are accessible in citation databases globally, mainly because of costs. To file in any of the big IP5, you're looking at about a minimum of $5,000 to $10,000 per patent. But you will file at a national registration agency for maybe $200, but your work is not going to be accessible. All right? Yet the metadata, so when I say metadata, the information you use, the standards you use to file is what has been set by WIPO. So you see, there's a discrepancy because of cost. Now, this is now where persistent identifiers come in, because with what we want to do is when you assign persistent identifiers to this patent data, it means at least you can have access to the bibliographic information, the metadata which can be used. When it comes to indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage, first of all, we are looking at it from a sovereignty perspective. There's quite a lot of research on research output on indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage, but we don't see what contributed to it from an indigenous
knowledge. In fact, 1 minute is up.
Yes.
But I know if you really enthuse about the whole PID's idea, you have to catch up with Joy Owango. Were you on LinkedIn?
Yes.
Just launch your social so they can just follow you up and then get more information. So just go to LinkedIn and just search for Joy Owango and just interact with her more of this new PID Alliance and a whole lot more on how to make these indigenous artifacts, both knowledge and also tangibles, very more accessible and also well originated. So just this is where time affords us on AAU Talks, the voice of higher education in Africa. I believe you've learned a lot and you look forward to get to know more from Joy, and also keep watching AAU Talks, the voice of higher education in Africa. My name is Ajaman Ochodako, and catch you another time on the show. Have a nice day and bye.